celebrated chef and restaurant owner disappeared. He said she left him. What happened next stunned their community.
There were many sinister secrets hidden away in the Viens family home in Lomita, Southern California, including a den of drug use, drunkenness, and domestic abuse. However, all went to hell one foreboding October night in 2009, and Don Viens disappeared without a trace. Even the most seasoned homicide detectives would get shivers when they learned the truth about the circumstances surrounding her disappearance. What was the cause of Dawn's disappearance? How were the cases resolved by the investigators? The location of the case today is Lomita, which translates from Spanish as Little Hill, and is a city in the state of California with a population of just under 20,000. It is one of California's smallest cities, and like most of the state, enjoys a pleasant temperature. It is highly recommended to come because it contains several well-known attractions, such as the South Coast Botanic Garden and the Lomita Railroad Museum. However, a terrible tragedy occurred at this location in 2009. Dawn Marie Viens was born here in March 1970. When she and David Viens first met, she was still married to David's first wife. David, who was born in Vermont, was 10 years Dawn's senior, but money was never an issue in their romance. Dawn fell in love with the divorced father of 3 when they first met in the early 1990s while they were both working at a restaurant. In 1997, they got married, and as time passed, their love just became deeper. After over 12 years of marriage, David and Dawn Viens made the decision to relocate to Southern California's lovely community of Lomita in 2008. They collaborated to open the Time Contemporary Cafe, a lovely eatery that immediately gained notoriety. The couple decided that Lomita, a tiny town in Los Angeles County, would be the ideal location for their new business because other small local companies were close by. Dawn served as the restaurant's general manager and hostess, while David, the creative chef, created delectable dishes using only ingredients that were freshly acquired locally. The couple put forth a lot of effort to make sure the establishment was a success. Despite working long hours, the couple never lost their spark. They collaborated with a small staff to develop a diverse menu that included tacos, pasta, salads, burgers, and sandwiches. With a crew of just 2 servers, customers were made to feel welcome by Dawn's friendly grin and contagious energy as she welcomed them. David and Dawn Viens were a dynamic duo who were constantly on the go and looking for new adventures. 3 children from his first marriage already existed. One of them, Jackie or Jacqueline, was close to her stepmother Dawn. Jackie was a young child when David and Dawn first shared a home. Dawn even taught Jackie many things, including how to write in cursive, and Dawn and Jackie grew close. David and Dawn relocated frequently while they were still together. They first touched down on Florida's lovely Anna Maria Island. There they established the Beach City Market and Grill, their own little slice of heaven. David Pepin, the restaurant manager, was Dawn's brother, so it was a family affair. They subsequently relocated to Southern California. With her stunning auburn hair and sun-kissed skin, Dawn, who is only 39 years old, made them feel as though they had discovered her forever home. Her inherent attractiveness and unwavering grin make her a joy to be around. David, her spouse, was also quite the catch with his boyish good looks and endearing personality. He still has a youthful appearance despite being 48 years old, and he frequently covers up his receding hair by donning a baseball cap. Together, they put in a lot of effort to make their restaurant successful, and it paid off. Everyone who was close to them could see the love and joy this magnificent couple, who appeared to have it all, was exuding. Dawn and David Viens had long been regarded by their friends and family as the ideal pair. There didn't seem to be any conflict in their marriage, which seemed to be a match made in heaven. However, appearances may be misleading, and the relationship was more complex than it first appeared. Below the surface of their ostensibly ideal union, a sinister and perilous secret was being kept by Dawn and David Viens. Deep rifts in the couple's relationship had been caused by their drug and alcohol usage, rising financial problems, and what appeared to be frequent physical violence. Dawn's companion, Karen Patterson, had often seen odd bruises on Dawn's body, with the most recent being marks on Dawn's neck in 2009. Dawn ultimately admitted, after Karen pressed her for details, that her husband had grabbed her by the neck and choked her. Dawn disregarded Karen's worries, saying it was just a heated disagreement that had escalated. Karen, however, received another upsetting contact from Dawn a month later. This time, during a contentious disagreement with David, she barricaded herself in the restroom out of fear. Dawn begged Karen not to report the incident to the police, but Karen immediately volunteered to do so. The couple's problems were also known to Joe Kakashi, the proprietor of the motorcycle repair shop across from the time-honored cafe. David confided in him about Dawn's drinking issue. While Dawn disclosed that David was overbearing, it was becoming more and more obvious that something genuinely evil was brewing behind closed doors as the secrets kept piling up. Fall 2009 was almost here, and Dawn Viens appeared to be concealing something. She reportedly instructed Joe to keep the $700 in cash hidden from her husband for the month of October. As the couple's tension increased, David learned about the hidden hoard on October 18 and screamed in rage, threatening to kill Dawn. However, the money came from Dawn stealing from the restaurant's accounts. On October 19, Dawn had planned to deliver more cash with Joe, but she never did. After her disagreement with David, she went missing on October 18. It seemed as though she had gone into thin air, and the small town of Lomita was filled with anxiety and doubt. Everyone was left wondering what might have happened to Dawn Viens, including whether she had been the victim of domestic violence and whether David had carried out his terrifying threat. In time, the truth would surface, but the town continued to be shrouded in mystery regarding Dawn's disappearance. As the days went by and Dawn Viens was silent, Chilka Kuachi worried. He was aware that David Viens' explanation didn't make sense, and he couldn't get rid of the thought that something awful had happened to her. Joe couldn't help but notice that Dawn's car was still parked outside the restaurant despite David's assertion that she had just left him. When he approached David about it, the man was prepared with an explanation. Though it seemed like a lie, he told Joe that Dawn had broken up with him. Joe made the decision to pay greater attention to David, who was standing across the parking lot from him at his motorcycle maintenance shop. While searching for someone to assist him in running the business without Dawn, David continued to tell this story to the staff members of the restaurant. Joe, however, was adamant about finding the truth at all costs because he was aware that there was more to the story. It was unexpected for David Viens to call his daughter Jackie, but soon after, Jackie was on a flight to California. Jackie couldn't help but be excited at the prospect of spending time with her father. She was unable to ignore the tense atmosphere as she entered the cafe, though. She was informed by David of the issues Dawn and he had been experiencing, and Jackie was conscious of the 17 years her adored stepmother had spent in her life. He brought back a lot of memories for her, and she couldn't help but wonder what had gone wrong during the marriage. Jackie came to the conclusion that Dawn's binge drinking might have contributed. She recalled a time when Dawn had snorted down a beer in a restaurant early in the morning when they were vacationing in Florida, and how she had kept her drinking a secret from her husband. Jackie made an effort to understand everything. She started to understand that there was more going on here than her father had initially said. With each passing second, she attempted to solve the mystery of what had happened to Dawn and the reason her father had requested she come and assist him. The tension was obvious. Jackie sensed something was wrong as the tense atmosphere at Time Cave grew more intense. Joe Kakashi was also on high alert at the time, and David Vienna's behavior aroused his suspicion. David was seen locking hands with a young waitress called Kathy Gavin just 2 weeks after Dawn left. She received Dawn's old position with David's prompt promotion. But it didn't end there. Before the cafe opened, Jill noticed David's pickup in the parking lot, and Jackie Viens and Kathy Gavin were spotted throwing boxes of Dawn's clothing into the trash. This was a chilling scene that Jill experienced firsthand. All at once, Jennifer Patterson. Karen tried to call the police, but Dawn's friend was particularly worried after learning of David's history of assaulting her. It appeared that they were not taking it seriously. Dawn Pippin's sister, Donna Pippin, took matters into her own hands and reported Dawn missing. She was aware that David's account was illogical. Why didn't Dawn tell her family if she had actually left? Dawn's younger brother, David Pepin, was well acquainted with the couple and claimed that because Dawn had grown up and desired more independence, her marriage to David had become toxic. Dawn's case appeared to be going nowhere when David wouldn't give up control. She was forced to reveal the confession after being interrogated by the detectives. The 23rd of February 2011, when David Viens read the follow-up article by Larry Altman, he became aware that he was being investigated and that the police were after him. Panic then set in. David was aware that he was out of time, and his inebriated error cost him everything. David Viens was experiencing extreme panic. He went to his girlfriend Kathy Galvin's apartment in Torrance clutching a newspaper with a headline stating that Dawn's absence was being investigated as a possible homicide. He sobbed as he confessed that Dawn wasn't coming back and that it was an accident. David hopped into his car and sped away from Calvin's attempts to calm him down. Calvin was able to climb into the passenger seat and try to stop them from acting rashly. His face was dripping with tears. David disregarded the advice. A sheriff's deputy saw David's Toyota 4Runner traveling at a speed of more than 80 miles per hour. When David's vehicle did not stop when the deputy tried to halt it by blowing his car's siren, the deputy began pursuing them. David turned into the parking area as soon as his car arrived at the point, the Center Lighthouse and Rancho Palos Verdes. It was a location with a view of the 80 to 130-foot steep cliffs that dropped into the Pacific Ocean. Galvin begged him to stop tugging at his clothes so that he wouldn't do something that couldn't be undone. The deputy arrived at the same spot in the interim and made an effort to chat with David. David, however, was distraught and mumbled his excuses while claiming that no one would believe him. He gave Galvin one last apology before climbing over the guardrail as Galvin gasped in fear and desperately tried to stop him. Before David could jump, he mumbled something to the effect that Calvin kissed her and then pulled her away with both hands. David was standing on the opposite side of the guardrail, rejecting the deputy's attempts to reason with him. Galvin was pulled away from the cliff's edge by the deputy's swift action, but it was too late for David, who took a few steps and leaped off the edge, falling 80 feet into the turbulent water below. The deputy and Galvin watched in terror, wondering if David had perished at the base of the cliff. It was a heart-stopping moment. At the bottom of the water, a guy who had formerly been on the run lay unmoving. He seems to have already met his demise. However, David Viens was miraculously saved from his suicide attempt and was taken to the hospital right away for surgery. Many people, including his late wife's relatives, were shocked to learn of his survival. Their long-held suspicion that David was responsible for her disappearance was only strengthened by his suicide attempt. From his hospital bed on March 1, 2011, David spoke with Sergeant Garcia and made a startling admission about his involvement in Dawn's death. For Dawn's family, who had been looking for clarification for so long, it was a moment of relief. David Viens stoically revealed to Sergeant Garcia that he had been violent without cause, which had resulted in the death of his wife. He stated that his wife's drug addiction and the money missing from the business were both factors. David claimed that he had previously bound her hands and ankles when she became uncontrollable. But this time he put tape over her mouth, and she suffocated to death. David just gave the impression that the body could be found on the restaurant's grounds when asked where it was. But despite months of digging up flooring and searching, nothing was discovered. Despite the fact that Dawn Viens' body was still missing as of March 1, 2011, David Viens was accused of killing her. 3 weeks later, David asked to talk to the detectives once more and offered to tell them how he had disposed of Dawn's remains. He appeared coherent during his second police interview, which was filmed despite the fact that he was still recovering from his injuries in the hospital. Sergeant Garcia was interviewed by David, who first told him a horrific tale that was unlike anything he had ever heard. David's voice trembled as he described the horrific details to Sergeant Garcia. "We came up with a plan so insane, it could only be imagined in nightmares," he said. "We had to make it appear as if his wife had left him. He brought Dawn's body to the eatery and put her in a water-filled 55-gallon container. For 4 days, David simmered her body, straining what he removed at the end of each day. What about the leftovers he couldn't strain? Those were placed in the grease pit in the kitchen, and the larger chunks were double-bagged and disposed of in the cafe's trash can. When David admitted to hiding a skull in his mother's attic in Torrance, his insanity had no bounds. Sergeant Garcia could only watch in terror, as it was like something out of a thriller. Although David Viens' tale was horrifying and terrifying, some people found it too hard to accept. Sergeant Garcia was nonetheless certain that David's admission was accurate. He reasoned that during times of stress, individuals prefer to fall back on what they are familiar with, such as cooking. David's activities weren't out of the ordinary. The prosecution continued to believe that David was a cold-blooded killer, even after the house was searched and no evidence was discovered. David later recanted his confession when his trial began in September 2012, claiming that his admission of cooking his wife's body was simply a hallucination brought on by the potent painkillers he had been given after suffering severe injuries. They claimed David ought to be found guilty of first-degree murder. David simply acted hysterically and destroyed his wife's body, even though the defense claimed that her death was an accident. A guy who has done a terrible act will ultimately face judgment in a grisly trial. Defense witnesses said at the beginning of the trial that David could not have cooked his wife's body in a restaurant for days without anybody noticing. The prosecution, on the other hand, asserted that he hid the body throughout the day and cooked it all night. David taped up his wife's mouth and limbs, but the defense said he did not mean for her to pass away. Despite the claims made by the defense, David was convicted of second-degree murder by the jury. His attempt at suicide, which they mistook for an admission of guilt, convinced them. David screamed and insisted that he hadn't hurt his wife during his sentencing. He expressed regret to Dawn's siblings and requested a fresh trial so he could give evidence in his own defense. David Viens, a man convicted of killing his wife, had his request for a new trial denied and was ultimately given a 15-year prison term for failing to testify in his own defense at the initial trial. Nevertheless, he continued to give interviews to Dateline for many years after his incarceration and offered his version of events regarding the night his wife was murdered. David claims that after a long work week, he arrived home to discover his wife, Dawn, was not there. In order to prevent being disturbed, he opted to barricade the bedroom door because he believed she was out looking for drugs. Dawn got home at 3 a.m. She started banging on the door, pleading to be allowed inside. When she finally managed to get through, she leaped atop the dozing David and began slapping him in the face. David asserted that despite his repeated requests for solitude so he might get some sleep, Dawn persisted in attacking him. She then got up and went downstairs to the living area from the bedroom. Because she had brought the drugs home despite having promised him she wouldn't, David was outraged when he followed her and saw a package of cocaine on the table. When he dumped the cocaine down the sink, Dawn became furious and attacked him once more to protect him. In order to prevent her from screaming, David taped her mouth, arms, and legs in addition to her body. David went to bed after leaving Dawn taped up in the living room. He discovered Dawn had passed away when he awoke the following morning. In the living room, where she had thrown up and died from suffocation caused by the tape covering her mouth, he discovered her cold, lifeless body. David asserts that his intention was not to murder her, but rather to defuse the issue so that he could deal with it the next day. He decided to make it look like Dawn had gone away and abandoned him this time by saying he put her body inside 3 garbage bags and disposed of it in the dumpsters behind the cafe because he was afraid no one would believe it was an accident and he would be charged with murder. David's account of what happened begs several questions, including why he did not call for help when Dawn suffocated and what he did with her body. Although the interview raised questions about David's behavior, it also shed some light on what happened that evening. The narrative about cooking his wife, according to David Viens, was a hallucination brought on by injuries and medicines. His account, however, begs the question of why Dawn would assault him when he returned home. Why didn't she use drugs when she arrived instead of going to the living room? And if all he wanted to do was sleep, why would he follow her downstairs? Additionally, it seemed absurd to think that taping someone's mouth and limbs together would diffuse a crisis. David was also upset that Dawn was suspected of robbing the restaurant of money, even if he made an effort to dismiss it as a minor sum. It's probable that Dawn was working to accumulate enough cash to elope. The details of Dawn's death are unknown because no one is left to share the incident. In moments of stress, David may have resorted to his skills as a cook, which is why he may have initially considered boiling Dawn's body. This is one explanation for David's behavior. Even his daughter, Jackie, admitted in court that she overheard him joking in the past about burying a body in this way. Overall, it appears likely that David's aggressive behavior toward Dawn was a result of both her desire to leave him and his rage over her alleged theft. Lomita, a small Californian village, sees the setting sun. The once bustling time contemporary cafe is now closed down and vacant. Nevertheless, there are rumors that someone else recently purchased the building. The welcoming chef David Viens worked his culinary magic here, charming diners with his pasta primavera, until one day everything changed. The Yelp page for the cave still exists as a somber memory of times gone by, but the once bustling cafe has been replaced with a pizzeria, with the aroma of tomato sauce and mozzarella cheese filling the air. And as David Viens completes his term of imprisonment, he looks forward to the time in 2023 when he will be qualified for release. But the query continues to be present. He claimed to have cooked a body to dispose of it. Or was everything just a dream? It's possible that the truth of what transpired at the time period cafe and the disappearance of Dawn Viens will never be fully revealed. Do you believe Sergeant Garcia made the correct decision in his investigation? Do you believe David Viens was a skilled storyteller when it came to the disappearance of his wife? Please share your opinions with us in the comment area. For more compelling true crime stories, remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel.